We're really excited to have you here. I'm Christina DeRose. I'm the director of Kresge Arts in Detroit. Heads up, we are recording this session today, so if you prefer to be off of video, that's totally fine. Feel free to mute your video at any time. I want to say thank you to other folks who are also making today's session happen on behalf of Kresge Arts in Detroit. That's Layla by Go Rich, Andrea Ulapoti, and we also have two folks helping us out today with ASL. Those are Joan and Carly, who you'll see coming on and off the screen at different times. A note about Kresge Arts in Detroit, if you're not familiar, we're funded by the Kresge Foundation and we are administered by the College for Creative Studies. So today we're hosting another installment of our Artist Salon series that's focused on the 2020 Kresge Artist Fellows. And of course, you know this because you're here, and you know that today's focus also is Mike Khoury, which we're really excited about. We did, if you saw it, have a couple other artists who were in the lineup, and unfortunately, due to circumstances unexpected, they are not with us able to join today. So hopefully we'll get focus back around on them at a different time. But today it's all focus on Mike, which we're really excited about. What else do I need to say? Mike, if you'll take a moment and wave hello so everyone can find you on the screen. We'll have a moment to have you introduce yourself here before you share a little bit more about your work through the video that you've prepared for today. And if you haven't already, please do us a favor and go ahead and drop your name, your pronouns, and where you're joining us from in the chat, because that allows us to connect a little bit to each other, even when we're in this virtual time, which it's a bummer not to be gathered in person, but it's certainly better to be able to gather virtually than not at all. So again, Christina DeRose, my pronouns are she, her, or they, theirs is totally fine as well. So we're going to move quickly into putting all the attention on Mike so that we can get to know Mike's practice, and there'll be a Q&A followed after that. And if along the way you experience any tech issues, feel free to reach out to tech support, which is Layla here by chat, and she can help figure out what may be going on. As well, we invite you to put any questions for Mike in the chat at any time. That's how we'll be facilitating things, is through that chat. And so you don't have to wait until the end. You're welcome at any point to say, hey, here's what's on my mind, and we'll pull questions from that chat. And I think that's all of it for the intro. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to you, Mike, and invite you to provide any context you'd like for what we're about to see.
Thanks. Thanks, Chris. My name is Mike Khoury. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I am a violinist and composer residing in the Detroit area. And I prepared a short video today, and my hope was just to give everybody just a quick slice of sort of what it's like in my studio, in my little world. So I filmed it in my studio, and it was just a short couple of pieces about some things I'm working on, and to give you a little bit of insight into my my practice of evolving music, my practice of creating music. And then I guess the one thing I would want you to take away is that it's not exhaustive. It's just a little piece of what I'm working on, among other things. And then, you know, it's sort of like, I guess, walking into my world for a couple minutes, or walking into my studio. So I invite you to join me in my studio for a brief period. Hi, my name is Mike Khoury, and I am a composer and a violinist and a sound artist and a researcher. And this is my studio where I do the majority of my work. I call it Entropy. In addition to hosting a 16-track studio here, I have a library. I have an assortment of instruments and electronics ranging from percussion to wind instruments. And this is where I do the majority of my experimentation and composition. And today I'd like to share with you some of the work I have in progress, just to share some of my angles and aspects to my method for composing. And as I've mentioned in a couple different arenas before, the way that I do my composition is driven largely from improvisation, but it's also very much influenced by quantitative methods in the social sciences. I'm trained as an economist and studied economics at the graduate level, so I bring a lot of the statistics literature into my approach to composition, specifically in the concept of how sounds correlate to each other or sometimes don't correlate to each other, and how I sort of exploit the degree of correlation that I could use between different kinds of sounds. That goes for harmony as well, in traditional harmony. So today what I would like to share with you is some of my approaches to how I look at composition, and also how I involve elements of ethnic music in my work. So I'm Palestinian by descent, and while I'm not Muslim, a lot of the music from the Muslim world and the Islamic world plays a role in the music that I make. It's largely Arabic music and or Arab music, and oftentimes in Arab art or in Islamic art, you will see that there are not beginnings or endings to patterns. And you'll see that that's a key element in some of the work that I do, where it just sort of comes into flow and then starts to take shape from there, and then exits without necessarily some of the traditional resolution that we might expect to hear in Western music. So with that, I'm gonna share with you some of the experimentation I'm working on with electronics. So what I have here are a handful of synthesizers. And some of the work that I do involves sound art, so in the manipulation of sound that is synthetically generated. And so this is where I'm going to be considering some of the correlations or lack thereof in sound, and how I use multiple sound sources to manipulate sound, to introduce sound, and then to sometimes juxtapose the degree of correlation between those sounds or smash them up against each other. I'd like to show you just for a moment. So that's where I was taking multiple sources of sound and manipulating them, or sort of, I guess I treat sound in sort of like a malleable form, so I can bend it, I can stretch it, I can work with time, I can also work with the juxtaposition of sound against each other. Some of my other research has to do with how to work with different kinds of ethnic music and involve that with something a little bit more modern in terms of the analog synthesizer. In this case, I have a viola with me today, and I'd like to play a little bit of music for you. It's kind of based on a raga approach to music, or the raga form from India. And what I've done is I've taken a synthesizer and set it up so it's playing some of the notes similarly to the Indian instrument of a tambura. And that allows me to have these synthetic tones behind me that are sort of approximating it in a thoughtful way, and then I will be playing notes and scales from a raga that are processed through a handful of pedals that I have behind me, and affect really only one or two, not that many. And you'll get to hear sort of how the sounds can work together. Some very, very ancient sounds can work in sort of a modern context like this. So I believe we'll have the live question and answer piece coming up shortly. And I would be thrilled to have any of you come to visit my studio here in Redford, Michigan, if you're ever available or if you're ever in the area, to see what I'm working on lately. And I look forward to hearing from all of you and talking with each of you.
Thank you, Mike, so much for sharing that visit into your studio and also for presenting work. It was really great to be able to see you creating something in the moment. And I'm curious if you could share a little bit about your process of improvisation versus writing music, how much you like to have plans ahead of time and where there might be spaces where improvisation, especially now in the pandemic. I'm curious if that's changed at all your relationship to improvisation, specifically over this past year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I enjoy writing music. I work on compositions too, and for ensembles or for duets or for all kinds of settings. I'm working on a piece for piano right now. But I also enjoy improvisation. It's a big part of my my lexicon. It's a part of my identity, and it's definitely changed a lot since you know the emergence of the pandemic. And so it makes it a lot harder because so much of my work is based upon my collaborations, and I'm working with other people oftentimes. And to be able to get together in one place is really, really difficult. And as much as I've you know, I enjoy technology and I enjoy using technology, I've personally struggled to be able to find the same level of engagement and connection with people, like using the online versions of technology. So I really lament not being able to come like face to face with people, because that's where the greatest connections come about for me. But one thing that has come out of the pandemic has been the opportunity to really go deep and do research by myself on a whole bunch of different topics and a whole bunch of different subjects, and to be able to refine my approach to improvisation as a soloist. So that's actually been, I don't know, sort of a mixed blessing, if you will.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's a question we have in the chat, which is, can you speak a little bit more about the incorporation of economic theory in your approach to composition? That was really fascinating, and I've never heard anything like that before. And curiosity about specifically, how does that work?
Yeah, so in my study of economics, I studied an awful lot of econometrics too. And econometrics is sort of statistics as it's applied to economics in terms of human behavior, in terms of making choices, and specifically in terms of the correlations we can seek out between musical ideas. So like I mentioned, collaborations are important to me. So as I'm playing with other people or even playing by myself, I can start to make decisions based upon the degree of correlation that I want to invoke in my work. So I can choose to be playing something completely counter to other people, not just counter time-wise or in terms of being quote unquote musically counter, but the idea itself will be counter in terms of timbre, in terms of timing, in terms of the notes, in terms of a whole bunch of other attributes, the attack of the work. Or I can choose to be very sympathetic. And so I'm varying those correlations in the moment while I'm responding to the people that are around me that I'm playing or that I'm playing with. I can choose to play not with them at all and run against them, or I can choose to play very sympathetically with them. And everything in between is on a continuum. Now that exists for all musicians all the time, but to be able to invoke sort of the statistical approach to it has been, I think, a unique way to approach music for me. It certainly has been, and it's been a way to create something different and to work with different elements as I'm building music and making music with other people. And the great part is it doesn't require anybody else to understand what I'm doing.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I'm curious how the physical space where you might be creating work or presenting work might also influence this idea of running with something or running against something. Is that an opportunity also that you look to say, you know, what's expected within a particular type of venue where you're presenting work, or even energetically, is that something that you might feel that you're sometimes like in the flow of a physical space versus interested in running counter to it?
Yeah, absolutely. The physical space itself, the audience also, I would cite as being um, uh, catalysts in terms of how the piece or an improvisation will go. There's all kinds of external or exogenous influences in our world that will come into play. The venue itself will too. If I'm playing in sort of a smaller venue, then the degree of intimacy can sometimes grow between myself and the audience, or between myself and even the other individuals I'm playing with or responding to. If it's in a larger kind of auditorium, or a bigger venue, then that brings about a whole different dynamic that is not just an opportunity, but requires me to adjust to it, and to also bring in these other ideas about um, economic correlation into play, and how the piece will unfold.
Yeah, there's a question here about your ideal performance venue, what that might look like. And I'm going to combine that with a little bit of a different question also, which has to do with what ideal support might look like. Like you've spoken about how economics and your training there plays into some of what you create. Um, you know, I'm really fascinated these days by the idea of universal basic income and what that would do specifically in arts and culture, and where in some ways, it's not the way I would imagine that we want to go about it. But right now, with the extra unemployment support and these types of spaces, some ways there's a not ideal test that's happening, but it is putting more resources out in pockets for a short period of time. So given the opportunity to have someone who's versed in economics and also in the arts, I'm really curious for you to take that wherever you might like in terms of ideal level of support for the type of work that you create and the conditions, and also ideal presentation venues for that support.
So let me try to answer the first question first, and I'll try to integrate it with the economic question. So my ideal performance venue is a full performance venue. So from from the economic perspective too. So honestly though, all joking aside, the ideal venue for me is a venue that sort of fosters the intimacy between the audience and myself, or the people that I'm playing with. And so that's really critical. And it doesn't have to be necessarily, that doesn't necessarily mean a small venue. It could be a larger venue or a mid-sized venue, but it's one that's very conducive to whatever is taking place. And you can sort of feel that energy and feed off of it when it's happening. Um, to answer your question about the economics, so I'm versed in both neoclassical economics and radical economics. So I spent a lot of time studying radical economics and Marxist economics. And to be able to have a source of universal income for artists would be a terrific and meaningful thing. It's happened in other places to great success, and it's worked out very, very well. When nations or administrations of governments tend to focus on those things, there's no question that, and there's actually some quantitative evidence as well, that not only does the standard of living increase, but the quality of life increases for the people within that nation, within that country, and also, of course, for the musicians that are doing it. There's more of a chance of connection. And there's actually a quality of living benefit that can be demonstrated by doing that. So of course, where does the money come from to do all of that? Well, that's another question, but it's not an unanswerable question. There's answers to those questions, and there's meaningful ways to bring that about and to subsidize the arts in a way that's uplifting to artists, and that helps to bring us together and creates an environment where we sort of can have a national American arts identity, for instance. And I don't know if we have that exactly today. There are places where it exists, and there's things you can point to, but that would be something that I think would be a wonderful goal to work towards and foster, and certainly not an impossible one.
Mhm. Absolutely. There's a question here in the chat that's, do you feel that tradition is fixed or does it evolve? Like for me, the person asking the question, electronics are now a part of tradition. What's your take of innovating with Arabic Palestinian music?
Yeah, I really feel that. And I feel the opportunity to do those things. There have been times where I've played for Arab audiences and they ask the question, how are you Arab? Why are you Arab? You know, what's Arab about what you do? And so there can often be, I don't know, some confusion for traditionalists and what the next step looks for Arab music. And to go back to that wonderful question, there's ways of taking our next step. And it sometimes doesn't have to be rooted in all of the traditional forms, which I love and honor. But I also don't really feel the need to repeat those. I would love to be able to take the next step and create like an Arab avant-garde or something that we could point to and say, oh, this is a movement. There's some next steps for people to take here by invoking technology or by taking different approaches or by bringing the quantitative methods from economics into how we perform music. That could all still be Arab too.
I have a question here that brings us back to the actual music itself, or the idea of sound. What does the fall of capitalism sound like?
What does the fall of capitalism sound like? I'm not sure if you guys, my visual of myself kind of went away, but can you guys still see me?
We did lose you on the visual. I'm not sure why. I'm
Okay.
sure tech support Layla is probably on it and he'll pop in if she's got ideas about how to adjust it, but we can hear you.
Yeah, can you repeat the question for me one more time?
Sure, I would love to repeat this question. What does the fall of capitalism sound like?
Oh, what does the fall of capitalism sound like? My goodness, that's such a beautiful question. Well, I certainly hear a lot of violins in it. So yeah, I mean, I think it's cacophonous. I think it's dissonant. I think it's, and at the same time, that cacophony and that dissonance is also could be liberating, and it could be very beautiful at the same time. So I find a lot of beauty in dissonance. Some people don't find beauty in dissonance, but I find a lot of beauty. It feels to me when I hear dissonance or when I play dissonance, I feel a great sense of liberation. And I feel great when I play it, I'm feeling liberated. So liberation is a key, I guess, element of what I do. So I would expect it to be pretty dissonant and liberating at the same time.
Yeah, I love that. I love the space too of imagining what post-capitalism sounds like, right? Like the other side of the fall. And it does feel as though there's a space of a lot of experimentation and possibility and unpredictability, but in a good way.
Yes.
Yeah. So curious, there are other questions hopefully coming along in the chat as well. And I'm wondering now if you are able to share a little bit about what you hope that people will receive from your music or take from your, even from your approach to creativity or how you actually present your work.
That's a wonderful question. There have been times over the course of my trajectory where, I felt sometimes like an outsider or sometimes unwelcome. And what I definitely don't want to do is make anybody else ever feel like that with regard to my music. I want my music to be inviting. I want it to be a place where people can come to. I want it to be a place of repose. I want it to be, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be like, always peaceful music either. But I want it to be a place where people can come to, and I want it to be a place that welcomes everybody and includes everybody, because connection is a really big part of my music, both in my collaborations with other musicians and artists, and also in terms of with the audience and the times where I've functioned in like a teaching capacity to be able to open new worlds up for, especially for young people, to be able to take their next step in music and find out that it's a world that you could spend multiple lifetimes on and still not even scratch the surface of. So, and I don't like to, I guess I don't like to reject any parts of music. I just like to incorporate the parts that I really like. So I'm not like against anything. I'm not against anyone. I don't reject anything. I find ways to bring it into my world, but I also want to make sure that I can take my next steps and help others to take their next steps in terms of their exploration in music and finding ways to connect to other people, both as musicians or just as individuals, because music is just such a wonderful way to find a way to connect.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if you'll share a little bit about who's influenced you in your life, whether it's within music, within arts and culture, or outside of that, in terms of the philosophy that you bring both to your own evolution and also to your guidance of others if you're in a teaching capacity.
Yeah, so my dad was a visual artist, and he worked in abstract expressionism, and so many movements in the visual arts tend to happen before they happen in music. So we oftentimes have to follow them. We don't have to, but we oftentimes do. And so I was very influenced by the idea that you can have one foot in the future and one foot in tradition at the same time, and they don't have to be mutually exclusive. Um, and both those things are available to us to be able to use. I guess, like, for me, the example is I love to improvise. I love to work with electronics. I love to experiment in the avant-garde. And I also play in a symphony orchestra. I don't think those things have to be mutually exclusive. They can certainly complement each other. So that's always been a big influence on me. The Detroit composer Khoury was a big influence on me too. I had a lot of chances to work with him and over the years while he was still alive, and spend time with him and learn about his compositional approach. And he had something that was very uniquely Detroit. And he, if there was ever a Detroit approach to composition, I would point to him as being a great representation of it. So he was also a very big influence on how I approach music.
It's bringing me back to thinking about what you mentioned in terms of not being sure whether you feel that there's a national arts identity and within the United States. And very curious also what you might have to share about that in terms of the thoughts of a Detroit arts identity.
Yeah, I believe there is a Detroit arts identity. And in spite of the fact that we don't have necessarily like universal financial support, for all artists everywhere, but there's definitely an identity for Detroit in terms of the arts. And when I think of, I might be a little bit biased, but when I think about music, I think that this is the center of the universe for, music for exploration, whether it's jazz and free jazz, whether it's classical music, whether it's the avant-garde. So many people have come from here. So much music has been not just created here, but defined here. And that's music that has changed the world on so many fronts. So I believe that, I don't know, there's something about the spirit of the city which drives people to do their best, to reach for greater heights, to find new and innovative ways to do things that a lot of people are still trying to catch up with around the world. So I believe that this is where a lot of great work happens, and to me, it's a center of the universe for so much creation.
I'm going to do a hybrid of a question that's here in the chat, which is how the pandemic has shifted your perspective as a composer, if it has. I want to sort of add to that a little bit of an idea of if we imagine what post-pandemic looks like. I'm not clear if there's ever going to be a moment that's like, aha, it is here, or if it's just one day going to sort of fade. Who knows what? But if we imagine whatever it is, we are solidly there. I'm curious what you believe that you would be taking with you out of this time as a composer, as a collaborator, whether it's with other folks who are working within the medium of sound, or whether it's within folks who are working as dancers or movement artists, where I know that you also have a history of collaboration.
Yeah, I think that the pandemic has shifted my perspective as a composer in positive and negative ways. Maybe negative is not the right word, but certainly in different ways. So for me, it's given me a chance to explore other means and methods of composition. And so I've been able to work on that, incorporate yet even more into my palette of choices that I can do. But at the same time, the isolation I don't think is ideal for any artist. That connection is really important and critical. I know it is for me. My collaborations are really important. Um, and and I value those, and I value the chance to explore and to exchange ideas, and just to have those conversations. Of course, we can still have those conversations, but it's not the same as when you're making art in real time with other people around you, and you feed off of each other's energy. And I believe that's something that I can say for myself personally that I've missed greatly, is that chance to feed off of other people's energy. And then the other half of your question was, sorry, can you repeat that, the second half?
We'll see if I can. Just thinking around what you would take with you from this time, especially considering work with others, but even perhaps work with cross-disciplinary settings when you're working with movement-based artists, for example.
Yeah. So I mean, I work with a host of other artists. I've missed working with them. I often wonder when the restrictions of living under the pandemic have subsided enough that we can all go out and participate with each other again. I'm like very, very curious. Also curious as a social scientist how that will play out. Will it be a kind of thing where we all just like go crazy and go out to galleries and museums and venues and concert halls and all these places and just um, think about how much we missed and how we missed that for so long? Or will we adjust to the new normal and say, you know what, I got used to watching stuff online, so that's how I'm going to experience art from here on out? And there's no value judgment either way, but I'm wondering, I have a serious question about how that's going to play out and what people's are they changing their relationship to art as a result of what's happened, whether it's music, visual art, dance, performance art, whatever. So I do have those questions with it. How it affects me, I can't wait to get out there and perform again. I'm really excited about the chance to be able to do that and to connect with others. And I'm also excited about the chance to work with other medium. I work with outside of the musical world. I work with a dancer, Leia Tawil. I'm excited about the chance I've been able to work on some film soundtracks, and I'm excited about the opportunities to do more film and television soundtrack work and more composition. But yeah, I mean, it will change the way that I think about my collaborations with others, and it certainly has increased my sense of value around those collaborations. Like I miss them dearly, and I have the sense that a lot of other people do too.
And certainly this has been an odd year to receive a fellowship, right? Where it's different than the expectation was when folks applied a year ago in January, when the application deadline for the 2020 fellowships closed. We didn't know what was going to be happening, especially come July when the fellowship actually kicked off for the 2020 fellows. And now here we are starting to look down the line and see the end of this fellowship year coming. And so I'm curious, knowing that folks who either are viewing this here or may view a recording later, who are interested in supporting your work, who are interested in supporting Detroit's creative environment and specifically with music and sound, what are things that you look out and said, hey, you know, this is what really would allow me to keep creating or creating my best work, both during this time when there are restrictions and going into the future? What are the types of, whether it's introductions to folks or opportunities or things that, aside from money, of course, which is abundant in the world, but often scarce in terms of it making its way into the arts and culture sector, beyond specific resources of unrestricted funding, are there other things that you imagine that are like, this would help me achieve my dream project? Again, whether it's connections to other artists or to venues or anything else that you might have in mind.
Yeah, art to be able to work with arts organizations is truly a blessing. Working with Kresge has been wonderful, but just because not only did the Kresge or as an organization respond to the constraints that were happening, but I really believe that they led the movement and set a new blueprint for how that could be approached for artists. And I give a lot of credit to Kresge for being able to do that. What would help me the most is being able to have access to those organizations, to those venues, to those curators that I could connect with, to be able to share work and take it to audiences who may not have been able to experience some of my work before in different settings. So there have been plenty of settings that I've been able to avail myself to, and they've been really exceptional. And I know that there's more out there. I would love to take my music, not just around the United States, not just around Detroit, but to be able to take it overseas. And I've had limited opportunities to do that. But I would certainly like to expand those opportunities to be able to take that work. And then also to, have influence come from those opportunities to, most recently, I was able to travel to Lebanon and perform some work and with Leah Tawil. And that was just really an exceptional experience, and one where I gained as much as I was hopefully bringing to the table.
I think we have time for like one more question. If folks have anything that's in their mind, feel free to drop it in the chat. A question that I have, I'm just curious about your perspective on is, a lot of times I think folks outside of arts and culture don't necessarily realize the impact that restrictions on migration have in terms of who can collaborate, who can present work in the United States, who can present work elsewhere, where can we present work? And that has a tremendous impact on the opportunity for traditions to continue, folks to learn traditions that they might not have been familiar with, and for things to evolve as well, or new ideas to cross boundaries, geographic boundaries, or political boundaries, even more specifically, I should say. So I'm curious if there's anything you'd like to share about that perspective, about travel, what's possible, and what in an ideal world would be possible for the sake of being able to collaborate and present your work, as you say, wherever the desire that you might have to share with audiences.
Well, I think no matter where you go, one of the things that we all have in common is we love to sit down and have a cup of coffee, right? Everybody loves a cup of coffee. Maybe not everybody, but it's one of those things it's nearly universal. So to be able to sit down with other artists, other musicians from around the world, and be able to relax and converse and talk about your lives, and to talk about your worlds, and to talk about the roadblocks that you come up against, and to talk about how you solve problems, and to talk about how you access resources, whether they were learning resources, financial resources, venue resources, anything like that. I think that's where we gain the most out of those experiences. And when we limit our ability to be able to do that, to exchange and travel, we don't get as good of a chance to experience how other people solve problems in the world, and how other people overcome their hardships or their challenges, or how other people might solve things. And we might have things to share, and we might have things to learn. And it's something that you just can't make up by doing it online necessarily. That face-to-face is really critical. Being able to allow people to come into the United States and share the results of their research and their hard work, coming from a completely different perspective, that will change the face of American culture. That will change it radically for the better in a short amount of time. And that's something that I look forward to happening again.
Absolutely. And last question that we have here in the chat, are there any performances or opportunities coming up to see your work, whether it's online, whether it's in a socially distanced COVID space, or if you have things even coming up this summer, like any outdoor opportunities that it might be in the works?
Nothing this summer, but Leah Tawil and I are working on a new work called Zombie Frequencies of the Palestinian Diaspora. And that will be at the University of Michigan. UMS is presenting that work in April of next year here in Detroit. and they're producing it, and we're working closely with them as part of an evening of new Arab art. So more to come. That
All
will
right.
be the venue will be Spotlight for that.
All right. And that's April 2022.
Correct.
And for folks who want to follow your work, whether it's on social media, your website, etc., will you actually, it may be already prepped that it's coming up. Look at that.
There it
Text
is.
on this, they're way ahead in terms of just checking out that in the chat, your email, your website, your Instagram's there, and you very generously in what you presented today invited folks to visit your studio in Redford. And I would encourage people to definitely take you up on that, because to be able to see where work is created, even if it's even if one's a musician, is always something that's just like, oh, how do you have this set up? And for folks who don't have that practice, to not be shy to check things out, whether you're coming from a visual arts tradition or something else. Just again, as you mentioned, the being in conversation with other artists is so critical. And so I want to really thank you again for your time today, for joining on a Sunday, no less, to make sure that we have people who can listen in. And want to check in and see if you have any closing comments that you'd like before I do the final wrap up.
No, thank you everybody for being here, and thanks for hosting this, Chris and Kresge. And it's been a pleasure and an honor to be able to connect with all of you in the best way that we can.
Awesome. Well, I encourage everyone to keep an eye also on social media, Kresge Arts in Detroit, through Instagram as well as Facebook and Twitter, where you'll get updates about things that are happening with all different artists who've received fellowships and other awards. Thank you again for joining us here today, and hope that you'll continue to follow the series. I'm sure that in the chat there'll be a link to the upcoming salons that are going to be happening. We have one coming up that's focused on dance and performance, and you can register for that. That's on Thursday, April 29th at 1 p.m. And again, on behalf of Kresge Arts in Detroit, we look forward to seeing you next time, and thank you for joining us today. Take care.